in a famous book that he wrote in 1932 entitled The Nature and Significance of Economic Science. The difference between that conception of the decision and what Mises called human action, that difference, that contrast, I was finally able to pin it down. The difference between a Robbinsian, as I would call it, a Robbinsian view of the decision and the Misesian concept of action is very simple. For Robbins, economizing decisions consist in manipulating scarce means in order to maximize the fulfillment of competing ends, means and ends. And this was a profound articulation that Robbins was able to make under the influence of the Austrians. And Robbins had an enormous influence over subsequent microeconomics. Subsequent mainstream microeconomics can be traced back to the Austrian insights that Robbins learned in Vienna in the late 1920s. However, those insights were confined to a view of the decision which starts out with the means being considered given and the ends, the objectives, being considered to be given. The decision consists in manipulating the means with respect to the given ends. It's, in a way, a mathematical problem. And indeed, mainstream microeconomics, mainstream price theory has pursued that point of view. It still pursues that point of view, and I'm not questioning its usefulness, but I'm questioning its completeness. What Mises, however, recognized is that when human beings make decisions, they are acting, meaning that at the same time that they are indeed rationally arranging means to, in order to achieve the goals which they have chosen for themselves, they are at the same time, in the very same decision, in the very same action, they are identifying what they believe to be the available means and what they believe to be, what they are choosing to be, the relevant ends. And so that human action consists of the Robbinsian decision encased in a broader, more encompassing notion of selecting the framework, which for the Robbinsian decision is considered to be given.
And this is the entrepreneurial element. This is the element of initiative, of taking hold of things and rearranging them rather than just mechanically interacting with them.
Right. And when Mises has written that every human actor, every human agent is to some extent an entrepreneur, what he meant, in my interpretation, what he meant is that in acting, a human being is identifying, choosing, discovering, creating, if you will, the framework within which he's going to be acting in a rational way. Let's talk about the possibility of making predictions. One of the ways in which predictions have been held to be, in principle, possible in economics is the notion of the so-called single exit solution. If we're in a room where there's only one door through which we can make our exit, it's fairly easy to predict where we will go. We're not going to go through the window, we're not going to go through the ceiling, we're not going to drill a hole in the wall, we're going to go through the single exit. Now, from a Robbinsian perspective, given the framework, given the ends and the goals and the ranking of those goals by the individual, given the available means, the rest is a calculation. It's a calculation problem. It's a mathematical problem. The solution is implicit in the data. There is a single exit. And consequently, in principle, the economists will be able to predict what's going to happen. So you see somebody walking into a supermarket, you imagine that person to have his utility function, you have that person, you have the person to have a specific number of dollars to spend, the prices of the items are on the cans, the rest is a matter of mathematical manipulation. It's in principle predictable. Whereas when one recognizes the broader entrepreneurial framework in which human action takes place, then it is clear that one cannot predict what a person can do because we don't know what that person believes. We don't know what that person expects. We don't know what that person is going to create. And consequently, there is a great fundamental existential difficulty in making predictions. I say this at the same time as I think one should remember that Mises himself was famous in making a number of remarkable predictions. But I always explain that Mises made those predictions not as economic theorist. He made those predictions as a wise man of the world who was able to understand what indeed people will expect, what indeed what they will do, but not as an economic theorist. Pure economics is unable to make the kind of predictions that in principle is expected of economic theorists in the mainstream.
Now, turning to the title of your book, Competition and Entrepreneurship,
yes.
What do the two things have to do with each other?
Yes, yes. As I mentioned, in the late 1960s, what became apparent to me was the important difference between a Robbinsian view of the decision and the Misesian view of human action. From this, it became apparent to me that the disagreements, which I have, of course, known for quite a number of years, between the notion of competition as it appears in the mainstream and the notion of competition as it appears in human action, that difference was able to be grasped and understood by me in a way which I had not been able to do so before. Let me explain. In mainstream economics, competition means the so-called model of perfect competition. The requirements of perfect competition are perfect knowledge, an infinite number of buyers and sellers, complete freedom of entry and exit, and an absolutely homogeneous product throughout the market. Those are the conditions articulated by the late Frank Knight, which are repeated in all our textbooks. That's what competition means. Clearly, that's not the kind of competition that we know in the real world. And it was not the kind of competition that was suffusing the economics that Mises was teaching and which he developed in his work. Competition there meant something quite different. It meant the active competition, the dynamic competition, the rivalrous competition that we know in the real world. Now, the mainstream textbooks treat rivalrous competition as a crude approximation to the ideal of perfect competition. And they will explain, yes, in the real world there is rivalrous competition because the real world is not yet in the perfect state. But competition in its pure ideal form, as it were, takes the shape and the pattern of the perfect competition with its four requirements. It became apparent to me that the difference between these two conceptions of competition was fundamental. It was fundamental not merely for the theory of competition, it was fundamental for understanding how the market worked. It was fundamental to understanding what Mises meant when he explained that the market is a process. What he was saying is that the market is a process of dynamic competition, where dynamic competition is the fruit of entrepreneurial discovery and insight. In the mainstream model of perfect competition, there is no room for the entrepreneur. The perfect world is a world without the entrepreneur. Whereas in the Austrian world, in the Misesian world, the market process is driven by active entrepreneurial discovery. That is the essence. The essence of it was the entrepreneurial discovery. The essence of mainstream economics was obtained by filtering out entrepreneur. As I've sometimes put it, to the mainstream economist, the entrepreneur is an analytical pest, is a nuisance.
Because they have factors of production, that's all they have.
Because they have just the mainstream has factors of production. The entrepreneur injects a note of indeterminacy, which is fatal to the mainstream mode of thinking. Whereas that which is being filtered out in the mainstream turns out to be the essential feature of Misesian economics.
In one of your books, you make the